Hey everybody, welcome to another lesson in Pavement Media. In this lesson, we're going to go through how to set up a studio camera from kind of start to finish. Now, I realize not everyone's setup is going to be exactly like this, but generally speaking, these are all the things you'll need to know to set up a studio camera. So let's start with the very beginning, a tripod. Now, a tripod should always be placed, ideally, with room for the operator. So looking at the tripod from behind, you can see I've got one leg forward and kind of this nice space for me to stand in behind it. So that's where we're going to start. If you can control it, what we want to do is have the head right about at chest height or so. We're going to build the camera up on top of that. There's a viewfinder on top of that. So we don't want it so high that we're looking up while we're operating. So we want to start about chest high, get the legs to, so if you're pulling out the tripod, just get the legs right up to, somewhere in here. And then what you can do is a tripod has a bowl mount on it. And so you can just loosen the bottom here and there's a bubble level right here. And we can just look at that level, make sure that that's level. And if the head itself is level, the length of the legs doesn't matter exactly. So that's how we get the tripod set, and then just make sure all the legs are locked. So just a real quick orientation that way. We set the legs away from you, place the head at chest height, make sure the viewfinder is not going to end up too high, and then we'll get a rough leveling with the head. Now, moving on. To attach anything to the tripod, we're going to need a tripod plate. So this is going to consist of two parts. One is going to be the tripod plate itself that goes on the head, and then there's the side that connects to the camera. So this is called a VCT plate. It has a really kind of distinctive V. It's an old Sony plate that's kind of been adopted everywhere. So it's not actually, it doesn't have anything to do with this V. It's just a Sony model number was VCT, and it just kind of stuck. Anyways, we're going to take this VCT plate and we're going to stick it on the tripod and put it on like that. Now, again, there's going to be some adjustment on the tripod here of forward or back. When you build the camera, we just want it somewhere in the middle, lock it down, and we'll be able to adjust that further as time goes on. The other thing to note here is that the balance of the camera, as we start building things up, we want to make sure that nothing's going to fall over. So as we put the plate on, check the tripod now and make sure that the tilt lock, that's found on the side of the camera here. So make sure that the tilt lock is actually locked so that when we get the camera on there, it doesn't dive off. So I'm just going to spin this back around. One last note with the VCT plate is that it actually has a locking mechanism on it. So the idea is that you could, if you were a new shooter, doing a new segment, pop the camera on, it's attached, and then if you want to quickly get some handheld shots, you can just take it off without having to unscrew anything. But to get this to go, if the camera is in here, sometimes there's a pin that isn't always reset. So before we put the camera on, just pull the handle out, have that slide back in, and now we can line up the V on the bottom of the camera here. The bottom of the camera, this V here, is going to line up with the V on the plate. So we'll put the camera on, and there's some grooves, and we'll slide it forward until we hear it click. The click's really significant because we want to make sure that it not only locks up front, but there's also a little pin in the back. And we want to make sure if we do it incorrectly, what can happen is you can click the front and not the back, and you can see there's some wiggle there, and that's no good. So I want to make sure when you put the plate on that it's level in there, slid forward, and really on solid. So again, make sure that that tilt lock is locked so when you take your hands off, the camera doesn't dive. If the tripod handles aren't attached, go ahead and do that now. And it doesn't matter if the tripod handle goes underneath the screw or above the screw. So we could have this side is above it, this side is below it. It's just, there's one handle and we're having two sides. And that's so we can have zoom and focus back here. When we place the handles, some handles extend, these don't. So as we're building the camera, again, we want to be built so that we're not scrunched up. The handle's way up here. So we just want to build the camera so that we're comfortable and we can do this. And if that means you need to move up or down a little bit, find a box, find a little chair, anything to get you in the right position so that you can operate the camera comfortably. So now that we've got the handles on, we need to attach some stuff to that. So attach the handles first before we attach the grips. So we have the zoom demand. This is going to go on the right side, and the zoom demand is a servo which means that it drives a motor. And we can just slide this guy on here. Now, sometimes people take this whole thing apart. You don't have to take the whole thing apart. It just slides open and goes on the handle, and then it screws together. So what's nice about this is you can just put it at the end of the handle here, and it doesn't really matter how these screw together other than we want to keep the plates parallel as much as we can. If it's really tight on here and really wide on the bottom, it might not grip as well and spin while you're operating. So you just want to make sure you get a good grip on there. It doesn't have to be crazy tight, but just make sure those are parallel. So get it in a position where your hand's just going to fit comfortably, kind of just right in line with the handle there. Then the zoom connector is going to go underneath the lens. So generally there's only a couple places where things can go. So you see how I don't have to look under there. I can just put it on the connector and spin it until it locks, and then get that collar to seat. So there I go. Zoom is connected. The power isn't on yet, so we can't test that yet. It's driving a motor that isn't there. But most focus systems are actually mechanical. So they're manual instead of being motor driven. So manual focus, servo, zoom. Same thing, I'm just going to slide this on the handle, loosen it up a little bit. And we're going to make sure that the plates here are, let's see if I can get that in the camera here. We're going to make sure that the plates are parallel. Now, this is a bit of user preference, but I think it's more comfortable and more accurate to have the focus ring, the focus on the bottom, because I can get a longer range of focus adjustment than if it's on top. I feel like I can move my hand back and forth instead of just turning with my wrist. So I like to have it on the bottom, and then I can keep it right in the tips of my fingers. So if I'm operating, I'll have two hands on here, but that focus I can either kind of grab on the end or roll with my fingers, never leaving. So it kind of creates an index point. Once you figure out your focus point, where things are, you can kind of remember, okay, that's my finger's this much on, my finger's this much on, and it becomes really easy to adjust. All right, so now that we have these hooked up, we're going to hook up the focus cable. Now, these manual focus cables are actually really, really fragile. So we want to make sure that we're not doing anything too stiff with them. We don't want to be really rough with them. And the way that we never want to find this in a case like bent up. There's a manual drive in this. So if I twist one end, the other end of the cable moves. And that's what happens. We turn the focus knob and it turns a gear on the camera lens. So we want to make sure that this isn't bent, otherwise it's going to be kind of kinky in there and unreliable or have a sticking point. So what I like to do is I'll actually start on the camera lens first. So I'll get it on there, just kind of put it in the hole, and then I can spin this end until that seats in. So now I can see, yep, that's moving the gear of the lens. Actually, make sure you can see that. So that's actually moving the focus gear there, and then I'm going to screw it down. So I'm going to screw this down, and then I'm going to attach this to the focus back here. So same thing, I'm going to pull the collar back, get that flat plate to line up in the hole, and spin the focus until that sits in there. Now that plate is properly aligned, and I can set the collar down. So now I've got focus and zoom. I can have my zoom rolling, or my focus rolling, and if the power was on, the zoom would work as well. So let's finish building up the camera by putting the viewfinder on top. Now, the viewfinder is heavy. No matter, even if it's an LCD like this, it's really going to change the balance of the camera. So again, let's make sure that we don't lose the weight of the camera or tip it over when we stick this on. So a little V connector here, and there's a V on top. Most cameras have something similar to this. You just slide it in. It's not a powered connection. You just want to make sure it clicks, make sure it's in there, and then on this Blackmagic camera, we get power there and video signal there. So now we're pretty much set up until we add fiber to the camera. So now the camera's pretty much built. Everything is locked down still, and we're going to plug in the fiber to the camera. So the fiber cable has a red line and a red dot. So there's a dot here and a line here, and We don't want to uncover the connectors until it's time to really plug it in. And once they're ready, we'll just line them up, click, you can hear that. And then the fiber caps, just plug them together like this. That way, if it's dusty or dirty, the inside that touches the actual fiber optics in the middle doesn't get dirty. Now you can see the camera wants to tilt back because that monitor's heavy. So here's where we're going to balance the camera. So using the adjustment plate here, we can slide this back and forth. Now, since we got a lot of weight on the back, we're going to have to move everything forward to compensate for that. So we'll try it there. Loosen up the tilt, and just see if it holds in various positions. It's close, it's not perfect. We'll adjust that in a little bit. Finally, with the fiber cable, one thing we want to do is make sure that if someone walks by or if there's a tug on here, even if you step on the cable by accident, you don't want to be hurting the camera and put some stress on this. So we're going to do a tension relief. So we have just some cord here and a hole on the tripod, and we're just going to tie this to the tripod so that if anything were to happen, the tripod would be pulled and not the fiber connection itself. So it doesn't need to be any crazy knot. I'm just looping this on for now. And there we go. So we've got a tension relief. We have 2 handles, and we can pan and tilt. And it's roughly set up, so it's a little too heavy on the front right now. So again, I'm going to loosen this up, pull it back, and see where things are. So that feels pretty good. Finally, if the operator in the control room turns on the fiber, the camera will come to life. So when that happens, we can do final adjustments on the camera itself. We'll take off the lens cap, and we should see the viewfinder here. So the camera's up and alive, and now we can just kind of check everything, make sure it's all good and built. All right, so now we can see the zoom is working. And loosen up the setting, we can see the focus is working. I'm just focusing on a case out there. You can see. So a couple adjustments that we're going to want to do. First, we're going to make sure that the resistance on the camera is good. So I'm at a pretty extreme angle here just to fill the frame with something interesting. But there's a couple more settings that you're going to need to know. Speed. So a full deflection of the zoom, it zooms in, zooms out. Or I can go fast and have a much snappier zoom. So as a director, I want my operators to be able to quickly get any shot. And so that generally means I want them to lean faster on the end of the dial and not slower. But I still want you to be able to do a nice, slow zoom. So now that we've got the camera built, what else do we need to know? Final things that you need to do before you walk away from your camera. 1, let your director know that you're walking away from the camera. 2, make sure that the camera tilt is locked. If your balance isn't perfect yet, in particular, the worst thing to see in a camera operation, the worst thing to see is to see a camera starting to tip and dive, because you know it's going to fall soon. So make sure that your balance is locked. And then as far as pan goes, it depends on the situation. I like to generally keep the pan unlocked. That way, if someone's walking by, your cameras are in a somewhat busy area, they should always be protected, but if someone walks by, the camera's going to swing out of the way if it gets hit. If it's locked, there's a greater potential that it might actually get knocked over. So I like to leave that loose, but if you're doing an outdoor thing or some other circumstances where it's windy perhaps, locking that down can make sense. Finally, leave a usable shot so that people can see what's going on. You don't just want your shot to be on some unknown thing. You want to be able to see what else is going on in the room. So as a courtesy to everyone else on the production, just make sure that you leave a usable shot up before you walk away from the camera. So that's camera setup. There's a lot of different steps, but when we break it down to small pieces, we build up a tripod, handles, camera, and viewfinder. And in the end, we have a functioning camera system. Thanks for watching.